During our final divorce hearing, my husband Derek actually chuckled while his lawyer listed my assets. He leaned over the table, looking me dead in the eye, and whispered that he was taking half my millions, including the trust fund my grandmother left me. The courtroom erupted in whispers until I simply stood up, smoothed my skirt, and handed Judge Sterling a thick manila envelope. "Check again, Your Honor." The judge opened it, looked at Derek, looked back at the paper, and then burst out laughing. Before I tell you why the entire court joined in laughing at my ex-husband, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to humble an arrogant partner who mistook your silence for weakness. My name is Solange, 34 years old, and I never thought I would be sitting across the aisle from the man I vowed to love forever, watching him try to skin me alive financially. The fluorescent lights of the Manhattan family court hummed overhead, but the silence between us was louder. Derek sat there in a bespoke navy Italian suit I bought him for our 5th anniversary, whispering something to his attorney that made them both smirk. I sat alone on my side of the aisle, my hands resting calmly on my lap, clutching a single manila envelope. Mr. Vance, Derek's attorney, stood up and buttoned his jacket. He had that oily confidence of a man who thought he was fighting a helpless woman. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Brooks, is entitled to 50% of all marital assets acquired and appreciated during the union. This includes the penthouse in Tribeca, the tech stock portfolio, and specifically 50% ownership of Solange Ventures and the Grandma's Legacy IP holdings." I felt a muscle in my jaw jump. He did not just say Nana's name. He wanted the intellectual property rights to the code my grandmother wrote in the 90s, the foundation of my entire career. The audacity was breathtaking. Judge Sterling peered over his reading glasses, looking from the lawyer to Derek. "Mr. Vance, those are significant, complex assets. Is your client asserting he contributed to their value or creation?" Derek didn't wait for his lawyer to answer. He leaned forward, flashing that charming, dimpled smile that used to melt me, but now just looked predatory. "Absolutely, Your Honor. Solange might be the face of the business, but I was the muse. I was the strategy. I sacrificed my own entrepreneurial dreams to support her. Without me, she would just be a lonely girl with a laptop. She owes me this." The room went quiet. I could feel the eyes of the stenographer on me, waiting for an outburst, waiting for the angry black woman trope to make an appearance. But I didn't give it to them. I didn't scream that Derek hadn't worked a real job in 4 years. I didn't scream that his so-called sacrifice was playing golf while I coded until 3 a.m. I just looked at him. I looked at the man who slept in my bed and ate my food, now trying to erase my history. Judge Sterling looked skeptical, but he nodded. "The law's the law, Mr. Brooks. If you can prove marital contribution, the division stands." Derek winked at me. A literal wink, as if to say, "I got you." I gripped the envelope tighter. Inside were the documents that would turn his world upside down. But I knew I couldn't play my card just yet. I needed him to be on public record demanding exactly these assets. I needed him to be fully committed to his own destruction. As I watched his smug face, my mind drifted back to where this nightmare truly began. It wasn't in this courtroom. It started 3 weeks ago, on a night that was supposed to be a celebration of his birthday, but ended up being the night I realized I was sleeping with the enemy. 3 weeks earlier, the air in our Tribeca penthouse was thick with expensive cologne and the smooth rhythm of live jazz. I had spared no expense for Derek's 36th birthday. The catering alone cost more than most people make in a month, and the guest list was a who is who of New York's black elite. I was standing by the floor-to-ceiling windows, adjusting a floral arrangement, when the energy in the room shifted. It wasn't a subtle shift. It was the kind of cold draft that hits you right before a storm. Courtney had arrived. She breezed past the security detail I had hired, wearing a dress that was arguably inappropriate for a family gathering, and made a beeline for Derek. She was the wife of Derek's younger brother, but watching them, you would think she was the one married to him. She threw her arms around his neck, lingering a few seconds too long, before handing him a small, plainly wrapped box. I walked over, pasting my best hostess smile on my face, determined to be gracious. "Hello, Courtney," I said, reaching out to touch her arm. "I am glad you could make it. The traffic from Brooklyn can be brutal this time of day." Courtney barely glanced at me. Her blue eyes were fixed on Derek as she let out a high, tinkling laugh that grated on my nerves. "Oh, Solange, I didn't see you there. You just blend right in with the staff when you are in management mode, don't you?" She turned back to Derek, her voice dropping to that conspiratorial whisper she loved to use. "Derek, honey, open my gift. It is nothing fancy like the Rolex I am sure Solange bought you to mark her territory. It is just something from the heart." Derek opened the box. It was a batch of homemade cookies. Not just any cookies, but the specific recipe his mother used to make. He looked at them with a reverence he never showed for the investments I made in his name. Courtney smirked, tilting her head to the side. "I know Solange is too busy conquering the corporate world to bake for you, Derek. It is a shame, really. A man needs a home, not just a house managed by assistants." I felt the heat rise up my neck. "Excuse me?" I asked, my voice low but steady. "I take excellent care of my husband." Courtney finally looked at me, her expression dripping with fake sympathy. "Oh, I know you try, Solange, but let's be honest. You are very intense, very powerful. In my culture, we learn that a man needs a soft place to land, not another boss. Sometimes, Black women can be so intimidating that they forget how to be wives. You are lucky Derek is secure enough to handle a woman like you. Most men would have run for the hills by now." I waited for Derek to defend me. I waited for him to tell her that my strength was exactly what built the life he was currently enjoying. I waited for him to tell her to respect his wife in her own home. Instead, Derek took a bite of the cookie, closed his eyes, and sighed. "You are not wrong, Court. Sometimes it does feel like I am sleeping next to a balance sheet instead of a woman. I just want some peace and softness sometimes, you know?" The betrayal hit me harder than the insult. My own husband was standing there, in the home I bought, eating cookies baked by his sister-in-law and validating her racist, misogynistic jab at me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and took a sip of my champagne. I should have thrown them both out right then, but I didn't. I let it slide, thinking I was taking the high road. I didn't know that Courtney was just warming up, and that the wine glass in her hand was about to become a weapon. I pivoted back to my role as the gracious hostess, determined not to let a batch of cookies derail a $5,000 gala. I smoothed the front of my cream-colored silk gown, a vintage Halston piece I had won at an auction in Paris. It was the kind of dress that demanded respect, elegant and pristine. I was in the middle of discussing a potential merger with one of Derek's few legitimate business partners when I saw Courtney circling back toward me. She had a full glass of Pinot Noir in her hand, filled dangerously close to the brim. The room was crowded, but there was plenty of space to navigate, yet Courtney seemed to be walking a tightrope directly toward where I stood. She was laughing loudly at something someone said, her head thrown back, her movements exaggerated and clumsy. I tried to step aside, sensing the danger, but I was boxed in by the grand piano. Courtney turned, her eyes locking onto mine for a split second. In that moment, the clumsiness vanished. Her gaze was sharp, calculated, and cold. Then, she tripped. Or rather, she performed a theatrical stumble over absolutely nothing. The contents of her glass didn't just spill, they launched. A wave of dark red wine crashed against the chest of my white silk gown, splashing up onto my neck and dripping down to my waist. The liquid felt cold against my skin, but my blood was boiling hot. The chatter in the room died instantly. The only sound was the dripping of wine onto the marble floor and Courtney's exaggerated gasp. "Oh my God, Solange! I am so clumsy. I am so sorry. Look at your dress. It is ruined." She reached out with a cocktail napkin, dabbing aggressively at the stain, only grinding the red pigment deeper into the delicate fabric. I slapped her hand away. It was a reflex. "Don't touch me," I snapped. The sound of my hand hitting hers echoed in the silent room. That was when Derek finally moved. He didn't rush to me. He didn't grab a towel or ask if I was okay. He stepped between us, shielding Courtney. "Solange, calm down," Derek hissed, his voice low and angry. "It was an accident. Look, you are scaring her." He put a comforting hand on Courtney's shoulder. She was currently burying her face in her hands, producing fake sobbing noises, but I saw her peeking through her fingers, checking to see if he had taken the bait. He had swallowed it whole. Derek looked at me with open disgust, eyeing the red stain that looked like a gunshot wound on my chest. "Go upstairs and change, Solange. You look like a mess. And fix your attitude before you come back down. Do not make Courtney feel worse than she already does. She is family." I stood there, frozen. My husband had just watched his sister-in-law destroy a dress worth more than his car, and his priority was her feelings. He was comforting the arsonist while watching his house burn. I looked at the guests. His mother was shaking her head at me in disappointment. His friends were smirking. In that moment, the humiliation didn't make me cry. It clarified everything. The wine had ruined the dress, but it had washed away the illusion of my marriage. I didn't say a word. I didn't scream. I simply turned on my heel and walked toward the staircase, the heavy, wet silk clinging to my skin. That was the moment I stopped being his wife and started being his creditor. I wasn't going upstairs to cry. I was going upstairs to check the bank accounts. I scrubbed the wine from my skin in the master bathroom, the water running hot enough to burn. The red stain on my chest had faded, but the sting of humiliation was fresh. I wrapped myself in a thick white robe, feeling exposed in my own sanctuary. I turned off the faucet and reached for the door handle to re-enter the bedroom, but I froze. Derek was in the room. He must have come up the back stairs while I was showering. I expected him to be pacing, maybe rehearsing an apology or preparing another lecture about how I needed to be more welcoming to his family. But he wasn't talking to himself. He was on the phone, and his voice was low, intimate, and chillingly calm. I pressed my ear against the cold wood of the door, holding my breath. "Listen to me, Court," Derek said. His tone lacked the irritation he had shown downstairs. Now it was soothing, almost affectionate. "Stop crying. You did exactly what you needed to do. She is rattled. That is the point." My heart hammered against my ribs. He wasn't comforting his sister-in-law. He was debriefing a co-conspirator. I know, he continued, pausing as if listening to her complain on the other end. but you have to be patient. We cannot rush this. If I push too hard for the assets now, she will lawyer up with the sharks. We need her to feel guilty. We need her to feel like she is the one destroying the family. That is how we get her to sign the concessions. I leaned closer, my hand trembling on the brass handle. "Baby, look," Derek whispered. The word baby hit me like a physical slap. He was talking to his brother's wife. "Just hold on. Once I get the management rights to the holding company, the capital is yours. I already have the paperwork drafted for your med spa. $2 million in seed funding, masked as a real estate investment. It is a done deal. You will have your business, and we will finally be on equal footing with her." He laughed then, a low, dark sound that I had never heard before. "She is just the bank, Courtney. Banks do not get to have feelings. They just dispense cash. Once I have power of attorney over the Grandma's legacy fund, we won't have to pretend to like her cooking or her attitude anymore. Just keep playing the victim. It is working perfectly." I backed away from the door, my legs feeling like jelly. This wasn't just a toxic family dynamic. This was a heist. My husband and his sister-in-law were not just having an emotional affair. They were plotting to embezzle millions of dollars from my grandmother's estate to fund a vanity project for Courtney. They viewed me as nothing more than an obstacle to their lifestyle. A ATM with a pulse. I heard Derek hang up the phone and sigh, the sound of a man burdened by his own genius. I didn't burst through the door. I didn't scream. A strange, cold clarity settled over me. If I confronted him now, he would deny it. He would gaslight me. He would delete the call log. I needed to be smarter. I needed to be the bank he said I was. And banks have very strict protocols when they detect fraudulent activity. I tiptoed back to the bathroom vanity, picked up my phone, and opened my banking app. It was time to close the branch. The sun was barely up when my phone buzzed with a notification that would start the war. I had spent a sleepless night plotting how to protect my assets, planning to move the liquid cash into a secure holding account the second the banks opened at 9 o'clock. But Derek, or rather the person pulling Derek's strings, had beaten me to it. I opened my banking app, my finger hovering over the transfer button for the joint checking account. It was grayed out. A bright red banner across the top of the screen read, "Account frozen per court order, case number 4492. My heart stopped. I tried my credit cards. Frozen. I tried the business expense account. Frozen. I immediately dialed the priority line for my private banker, Charles. His voice was apologetic, but firm. "I am sorry, Solange. We received an emergency ex parte order early this morning filed by Mr. Brooks' attorneys. They claimed you were a flight risk with marital assets. He has filed for divorce, Solange, and he has requested a full forensic accounting of your grandmother's estate." I dropped the phone on the bed sheets. Flight risk? I was the one paying the mortgage. I was the one with the roots in this city. Derek was the one with nothing to lose. I threw off the covers and ran to the guest room where he had been sleeping since the wine incident. The door was wide open. The room was stripped bare. His golf clubs, his designer shoes, the collection of watches I had bought him, all gone. He hadn't just left. He had evacuated. On the stripped mattress, there was a single piece of stationery. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't an apology. It was a note, scrawled in his jagged handwriting. It read, "Do not bother looking for me. I am staying with family who actually appreciate me. The lawyers will handle the rest. P.S. I canceled the cleaning lady. You can scrub your own floors for once." I stared at the note. The pettiness of canceling the cleaning lady was so specific, So Courtney. It was a calculated move to inconvenience me, to make me feel small. But as I stood there in the silence of my empty, frozen house, I didn't feel small. I felt dangerous. He thought locking my accounts would pair. You might have the skin tone, you might have the hair, but you have forgotten what it means to be a Black woman who supports her family. You are so busy climbing that corporate ladder, trying to impress those white folks downtown, that you lost your soul. I gripped the phone tighter. Joyce, I paid off your mortgage last year. I paid for your knee surgery. And you never let us forget it, she shouted. You throw money at us like we are charities. But Courtney listens. Courtney brings food. Courtney understands that a man needs to be the head of the household. It is funny, isn't it, that a white girl understands our culture and respect better than you do. She is more of a daughter to me than you will ever be. The room spun. She was using my race, my success, and my generosity against me. She was elevating the woman who was actively destroying her son's marriage because that woman played the role of the submissive admirer, while I played the role of the equal partner. Derek is with us. I walked into the glass-walled lobby of Solange Ventures, expecting the usual hum of productivity. Instead, I walked into a wall of silence. My executive assistant, Sarah, usually greeted me with a rundown of the day's meetings and a double espresso. Today, she wouldn't even meet my eyes. She stood behind her desk, shifting her weight from foot to foot, looking like she was waiting for a bomb to go off. "Good morning, Sarah," I said, keeping my voice level despite the knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. "Why is the office so quiet?" Sarah swallowed hard and handed me a printed stack of papers. "Mr. Brooks sent an email," she whispered, "to the entire board of directors and the top 3 investors." I snatched the papers from her hand. The timestamp was 4 a.m. Derek had been busy while I was discovering his empty side of the closet. I scanned the text, and my blood ran cold. The subject line read, "Urgent update regarding Solange's health." The body of the email was a masterclass in defamation. It claimed that I was suffering from a severe nervous breakdown due to marital stress. It alleged that I had been erratic, paranoid, and making high-risk financial decisions without consulting my advisors. It even hinted that I was self-medicating. "Please be patient with Solange during this difficult time," Derek had written. "As her husband and partner, I am stepping in to ensure stability until she gets the professional help she needs." I crumpled the paper in my fist. He wasn't just trying to take half my money. He was trying to destroy my ability to make it. By painting me as mentally unstable, he was laying the groundwork to have me removed as CEO. If I was unfit to lead, the board would vote me out. The company value would plummet, and he could swoop in as the savior, or force a liquidation sale where he would grab the cash. It was a corporate assassination disguised as spousal concern. I looked up at Sarah. "Who has replied to this?" "Everyone," she said, her voice trembling. "The chairman wants an emergency meeting at noon. The investors from Silicon Valley are asking if they need to freeze the Series B funding." I felt a tear prick the corner of my eye, but I willed it back. Derek wanted me to break down. He wanted me to storm into that boardroom screaming and crying, proving exactly what he had written in that email. If I showed an ounce of emotion, I lost. If I showed weakness, he won. I took a deep breath, smoothing the front of my blazer. "Sarah, listen to me carefully," I said, my voice dropping to a register of absolute command. "Cancel the noon meeting. Tell the chairman I will be addressing the board personally at 4 p.m. Then, get legal on the line. I want a cease and desist order for defamation of character filed within the hour. And Sarah? Yes, Solange? Revoke Derek's security clearance. Wipe his access to the building, the servers, and the coffee machine. If he steps foot in this lobby, I want security to escort him out like a trespasser. He wants to play dirty? Fine. But he forgot that while he was playing golf, I was building an empire. And empires don't fall because of one angry ex-husband. I walked into my office and slammed the door. The time for grieving my marriage was over. I wasn't fighting for love anymore. I was fighting for my life's work. And unlike Derek, I actually read the contracts. I sat down at my desk and pulled out the original incorporation papers for Solange Ventures. There, in the fine print of the bylaws, was a clause I had inserted 5 years ago. A clause Derek never bothered to read because he was too busy looking at himself in the mirror. It was time to remind him who actually owned the throne. I sat across from Mr. Roth in my office with the blinds drawn. Roth wasn't just a private investigator. He was a forensic accountant who specialized in unraveling corporate fraud. He didn't offer me tissues or sympathy. He offered me a spreadsheet. He slid a black folder across the mahogany desk and pointed to a highlighted row. Here is your smoking gun, Solange. The $200,000 Derek withdrew wasn't cash. It was a wire transfer to a limited liability company registered in Delaware called Serenity Holdings, LLC. I frowned, staring at the name. Serenity Holdings. It sounded like a retirement home or a yoga studio. I have never heard of this company, I said. Is it an offshore account? Is he hiding the money in the Caymans? Roth shook his head and flipped the page. No, it is domestic, and it was established only 3 months ago. I pulled the articles of incorporation. The registered agent is a lawyer, which is standard to hide the owner's identity, but they made a sloppy mistake. The mailing address for the company's bank statements is a residential address in Brooklyn. I looked at the address he was pointing to, and the air left my lungs. 412 Maple Street, apartment 4B. That was Courtney's apartment. Roth continued, his voice clinical and cold. Serenity Holdings isn't an investment firm, Solange. It is a shell company, and the sole signatory on the bank account is Courtney Miller. Your husband didn't steal your money to gamble or buy a sports car. He wired $200,000 of marital assets directly to his sister-in-law. I felt a wave of nausea, but I forced it down. The pieces of the puzzle were slamming into place. The late-night phone calls, the way Courtney suddenly could afford designer handbags, the whispers about her opening a luxury medical spa. Derek wasn't just having an affair or being a bad husband. He was an embezzler. He was funneling my hard-earned wealth into a new life with Courtney, using a shell company to make it look like a legitimate business loss. Roth, I said, my voice shaking with suppressed rage. What did they do with the money? Is it still in the account? Roth sighed and opened the final page of the report. Most of it is gone. They spent $80,000 on lease payments for a commercial space in Soho. Another $50,000 went to a medical equipment supplier for laser machines. And the rest... He paused, looking at me with a rare flicker of pity. The rest was spent on personal expenses. First-class tickets to Miami, hotel bookings, dinners. I stared at the list of transactions. They had gone on a vacation together last month. Derek told me he was at a golf retreat in Florida. Courtney told the family she was visiting a sick aunt. They were together. using my money to fund their romantic getaway while I was at home working to put more money into the account they were draining. "Thank you, Mr. Roth," I said, closing the folder. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city skyline. I didn't feel the heartbreak anymore. That part of me had died the moment I saw Courtney's address. Now, I only felt the cold, hard resolve of a CEO facing a hostile takeover. They thought they were clever with their shell company and their secret transfers, but they forgot one thing. I know how to audit a fraudulent business, and I was about to pay Serenity Holdings a personal visit. Mr. Roth saw the look on my face and hesitated before sliding a second, smaller device across the desk. It was a tablet, glowing with the interface of a cloned cloud account. While the bank statements showed me the theft, this device held the motive. It contained the complete download of Derek's text messages and direct messages with Courtney over the last 6 months. I picked it up, my fingers feeling heavy, expecting to see sexting or nude photos. I was prepared for the physical betrayal. I was not prepared for the psychological dissection of my soul. I started scrolling. The conversation wasn't a passionate affair of two people caught up in lust. It was a business meeting between two parasites discussing their host. I read a message from Derek dated 3 months ago, the night I received my 40 Under 40 award. While I was on stage giving a speech thanking him for his support, he was texting her from the audience. Derek wrote, "She is going on and on about legacy. It is embarrassing. She actually thinks she is special because she got lucky with her grandmother's code." Courtney replied instantly, "Let her have her moment, baby. The higher she climbs, the more she is worth when we cash out. Just keep smiling and holding her purse. Remember, she isn't a wife. She is just our ATM." I stopped breathing. The words blurred on the screen. She is just our ATM. They didn't just steal from me. They dehumanized me. To them, my intellect, my drive, and my love were nothing more than mechanisms to dispense currency. I scrolled further, finding a thread where they mocked my grandmother, the woman who raised me. Derek wrote, "She wants to visit the cemetery again this weekend. I hate pretending to care about that old woman." Courtney replied, "That old woman is funding my spa. Go place some flowers and squeeze out a tear. We need that trust fund access." This was worse than finding lipstick on a collar. This was a systematic dismantling of my reality. Every kind word Derek had said to me in the last year was a lie, calculated to keep the pin code to my life active. They dissected my insecurities, mocked my features, and planned their future empire on the ashes of mine. They called themselves the visionaries, and me, the labor. I set the tablet down gently on the mahogany desk, afraid that if I held it any longer, I would crush it. The sadness that had been lingering in the back of my throat evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, metallic taste. Rage. Pure, unadulterated rage. But it wasn't the hot, messy rage that leads to screaming matches. It was the cold, precision rage of a sniper. Roth watched me carefully. "Do you want me to print these for the divorce attorney?" he asked. "No," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "Keep them safe. The lawyers will get them eventually, but right now, I need to go see an investment. After all, if I am the ATM that funded Serenity Holdings, I think I have the right to inspect the merchandise." I grabbed my purse and walked out of the office. I wasn't going home to cry. I was going to 412 Maple Street. I was going to Courtney's spa. And I was going to bring the kind of storm that no umbrella could protect them from. The address Mr. Roth gave me led to a prime retail space in Soho, the kind of real estate that costs $10,000 a month just to keep the lights on. The sign above the door read, Lumina Med Spa, in elegant gold lettering. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, just breathing. That gold lettering was paid for with the bonus I earned from the IPO launch last year. The marble floors I could see through the window were funded by the dividends of my grandmother's trust. I wasn't looking at a business. I was looking at a crime scene decorated with orchids and essential oils. I pushed open the heavy glass door. The air inside smelled of lavender and money. Courtney was standing behind the reception desk, laughing with the young receptionist. She was wearing a white lab coat, which was hilarious considering her only medical qualification was watching Grey's Anatomy. When the door chimed, she looked up, her smile bright and practiced. That smile vanished the second she saw me. Solange, she stammered, her hand instinctively going to her throat. What are you doing here? I walked up to the desk, my heels clicking sharply on the tile. I am just admiring the decor, Courtney. I particularly like the Italian marble. It looks very similar to the countertops I wanted for my kitchen before Derek told me we couldn't afford them. Courtney's eyes darted around the room. There were 2 clients sitting in the waiting area sipping cucumber water. She lowered her voice, leaning over the counter. You need to leave. This is a place of business. You are making a scene. I haven't raised my voice, Courtney, I said calmly. I am just a silent investor checking on her portfolio. Since Serenity Holdings funded this entire operation, and I funded Serenity Holdings, I believe that makes me the majority shareholder. Courtney's face turned a blotchy red. She didn't try to defend herself. She didn't apologize. Instead, she did exactly what she did at the party. She weaponized her victimhood. She stepped back, knocking a stack of brochures to the floor with a loud crash, and started shouting, Please leave me alone! Someone call security! She is threatening me! The clients in the waiting area gasped. The receptionist looked terrified and reached for the panic button under the desk. Courtney, stop acting, I said, disgusted. I am not threatening you. I am auditing you. She is crazy, Courtney yelled, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is my stalker. She has been harassing my family for weeks. Please, get her out of here before she hurts someone. 2 large security guards in black uniforms burst through the back door. They didn't assess the situation. They just saw a frantic white woman in a white coat pointing at a black woman in a business suit. They moved toward me with hands on their holsters. Ma'am, you need to come with us, the taller guard said, grabbing my arm firmly. I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I knew how this looked, and I knew that resisting would only give Derek more ammunition for his unstable wife narrative. I shook the guard's hand off my arm and adjusted my blazer. There is no need for force, I said, looking Courtney dead in the eye. I am leaving. But make sure you keep the receipts, Courtney. Every single one of them. Because when the IRS comes knocking, they don't care how loud you scream. I walked out of the spa with my head held high, while Courtney sobbed theatrically into the receptionist's shoulder. I had been kicked out of my own building, but I had seen enough. The fear in her eyes wasn't just about me being there. It was the fear of a fraudster who knows the walls are closing in. But I didn't know that Derek was already on his way, and he wasn't coming to talk. He was coming to finish what Courtney started. I hadn't even made it to the curb before a black Range Rover screeched to a halt in the loading zone. It was my car, the one Derek insisted he needed for networking meetings, now being used as his getaway vehicle. He slammed the door shut and stormed toward me, his face twisted in a rage I had never seen before. He didn't look like the polished husband I knew. He looked like a desperate man whose house of cards was trembling. "What is wrong with you?" Derek screamed, ignoring the pedestrians on the busy Soho sidewalk who stopped to stare. "You come here to terrorize her? After everything you have done to destroy this family, now you are stalking Courtney at her job?" I stood my ground, clutching my purse. "I didn't terrorize anyone, Derek. I came to see where my $200,000 went. And judging by the panic in there, I would say I found it." Derek stepped into my personal space, his breath hot and smelling of stale coffee. "You are sick, Solange. You are obsessed with money. That is all you care about. You sit on a mountain of cash your grandmother left you, while the rest of us scrape by. You think you are better than us? You are just a lonely, bitter woman holding on to a checkbook." I looked him in the eye. "I earned every promotion I got, Derek. And my grandmother left me that money because she knew I would protect it, unlike you, who steals it to fund his mistress's hobby." That was the trigger. Derek's hand shot out. It wasn't a punch, but it was a shove, hard and deliberate, right against my left shoulder. The force of it caught me off guard. I stumbled backward in my heels, losing my balance and crashing against the rough brick wall of the building. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I gasped, straightening up, shocked that he had actually put his hands on me. Derek didn't look sorry. He looked empowered. He pointed a shaking finger in my face, looming over me. "You don't deserve that money, Solange," he spat, his voice dropping to a menacing growl. "You never did. You hoard it like a dragon, while real people with real dreams, like Courtney, starve. She deserves it more than you ever will. Because she actually has a heart." I didn't yell back. I didn't strike him. My eyes drifted upward just above his head to the black dome of the security camera mounted above the spa entrance. The little red light was blinking steadily. It had captured the arrival, the aggression, and the assault. Derek was too busy feeling righteous to notice he had just committed a crime on tape. I adjusted my jacket, looking at him with a calm that terrified him more than any scream could. "You are right, Derek," I said softly. "I don't deserve this." I walked away toward the subway station, leaving him standing there, chest heaving, thinking he had won the argument. He had no idea that he had just handed me the leverage to strip him of everything. I wasn't going to call the police yet. I was going to save that footage for a much bigger audience. 2 hours after Derek shoved me into a brick wall, I was sitting in the high-rise office of my divorce attorney, Elena. The adrenaline from the physical assault had faded, replaced by a cold, calculating numbness. Elena, usually the picture of composure, looked flustered. She slid a thick document across the polished mahogany table toward me. It was a formal motion filed by Derek's legal team just 20 minutes ago. They had moved fast, likely spurred on by the confrontation at the spa. "They are not just asking for a financial settlement anymore, Solange," Elena said, tapping the paper with a manicured fingernail. "This is aggressive. They are demanding immediate executive control of the Solange and Nana Legacy Trust. They claim that Derek was the primary architect of the investment strategy and that you are currently mismanaging the assets due to your, quote, emotional instability, unquote." I picked up the document. The language was incredibly specific. It didn't ask for cash. It demanded full fiduciary power over the Legacy Trust. It demanded the right to liquidate, transfer, and manage all assets held within that specific legal entity. I stared at the words, and the corners of my mouth began to twitch. Elena looked concerned. "Solange, I know you are upset, But we need to fight this. That trust carries your grandmother's name. If we let him have control, he could liquidate everything by Monday morning. I looked up at Elena, and for the first time in weeks, I smiled. A real, genuine smile. Elena, I asked softly, do you know what is actually inside the Legacy Trust? She blinked, confused. I assumed it was the real estate portfolio, the Tribeca penthouse, the tech stocks. No, I said, leaning back in the leather chair. The penthouse is in a separate LLC. The tech stocks are in my personal holdings. The Legacy Trust was created by my grandmother specifically to handle the family liabilities and charitable obligations. She called it the Legacy because she believed our duty to give back was our true legacy. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. Derek and Courtney saw the word legacy and assumed it meant gold bars. They saw the word trust and assumed it meant free money. They were so blinded by greed that they didn't bother to request the balance sheet or read the bylaws. They just demanded the title because it sounded the most expensive. The Legacy Trust holds the deed to a crumbling historical building in Detroit that requires $50,000 a year in taxes, but cannot be sold due to heritage laws, I explained to Elena. It holds the operational costs for an elephant sanctuary in Kenya, which is a massive financial drain. And most importantly, it holds the unresolved tax liens from my grandfather's bad investments in the 80s. The trust is not an asset, Elena. It is a debt vehicle. It costs about $200,000 a year just to keep it from defaulting. Elena's jaw dropped. You mean, if we give him what he wants, he becomes personally responsible for the debts, I finished for her. He becomes the legal guardian of a money pit. I turned back to my lawyer. Draft the response, Elena. Do not fight it. Tell them I am heartbroken. Tell them I am devastated to lose my grandmother's legacy. But agree to their terms. Give Derek full, unsupervised, irrevocable control of the Legacy Trust. If my husband wants to be the big man in charge, let him pay the bills. Elena leaned forward, her eyes scanning the breakdown of Derek's demands with a newfound appreciation for my grandmother's foresight. She tapped the section where Derek demanded 50% of Solange Ventures LLC. Solange, do you realize what he is actually asking for here? She asked, a slow grin spreading across her face. He wants half my company, I said. He wants to sit in board meetings and pretend he understands algorithms. No, Elena corrected. He is asking for Solange Ventures LLC. He is not asking for SV Global IP Holdings. He didn't do his homework. Solange Ventures LLC is just the operating shell. It holds the lease on the office, the payroll liabilities, and the insurance contracts. It doesn't own a single line of code. The actual intellectual property is licensed from the holding company. So he is fighting to own the bills, I whispered, the realization settling in. Exactly. He is demanding the engine casing, but leaving the engine behind. If we give him what he wants, he becomes liable for 50% of the operating costs, but he has no legal claim to the revenue stream, which flows directly to the holding company he forgot to mention. It was perfect. It was almost too perfect. My husband was so focused on the name on the door that he forgot to check who owned the building. We have to make it look like a loss, I told Elena. If I just hand it over, he will get suspicious. He knows I am a fighter. If I surrender too easily, he might actually hire a competent accountant to look at the books. Elena nodded, pulling out a fresh legal pad. "We will drag it out. We will send a counteroffer refusing to give up the company. We will cry about how this business is your baby. We will make him fight for every inch. And then, right before trial, you will cave. You will give him exactly what he asked for, and he will think he conquered the world." "Draft the letter," I said, standing up. "Make it sound desperate. Make it sound like he is tearing my heart out. I want him to feel powerful. I want him to feel so secure in his victory that he stops looking for the trap doors." As I left Elena's office, the heavy weight in my chest had lightened. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a spider, and Derek had just flown right into the center of the web. But the war wasn't over. I knew that, before I could snap the trap shut, I had to endure one more wave of attacks, and right on cue, my phone buzzed. It wasn't Derek. It was his mother. And she wasn't asking for a truce. She was coming for the house. The plan was in motion, but I hadn't accounted for the audacity of Joyce Brooks. I was in the living room of my penthouse, packing a few boxes to sell the narrative that I was liquidating assets, when the private elevator chimed. I hadn't authorized any guests, which meant someone had used an emergency key. The doors slid open, and there stood my mother-in-law, flanked by 2 movers carrying fabric swatches. She didn't knock. She didn't say hello. She just walked in, looked at my packing boxes, and clapped her hands together. "Good, you are already packing," Joyce said, stepping over a box of books. "That saves us some time. The movers will need this room cleared by Tuesday. Derek needs a calm environment to heal." I stood up slowly, a porcelain vase in my hand. "Excuse me, Joyce. Derek is not coming back here. This is my apartment. My name is on the deed." Joyce waved her hand dismissively, pulling a tape measure from her purse. "Oh, Solange, don't be tedious. My poor son is suffering from severe anxiety because of your bullying. The lawyers are already drafting the motion for him to have exclusive use of the marital residence during the proceedings. Since you are the cause of his stress, it is only right that you leave." She walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, measuring the width of the glass. "These drapes have to go," she muttered to herself. "Too dark. Derek needs light. Maybe a nice cream linen." I watched her, stunned by the sheer entitlement. She wasn't just kicking me out. She was redecorating. She was erasing me from my own home before a judge had even ruled. "You cannot be serious," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You think you can just walk in here and measure for curtains while I am still living here?" Joyce turned on her heel, her face hardening. "You are lucky we are letting you pack your clothes, Solange. After the way you humiliated Courtney, you deserve to be thrown out on the street. But we are a Christian family. We are giving you 3 days. Derek is coming home on Wednesday, and he doesn't want to see your face or your tacky art collection." She gestured to the movers, who looked uncomfortable but started moving toward my sofa. "Put that down!" I shouted, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. Joyce stepped into my personal space, her eyes narrowing. "Don't you dare raise your voice at me. You are a guest in this family now, Solange. A temporary, unwanted guest. You lost your husband because you were too cold to keep him. Now be a good girl, finish packing your boxes, and get out before I have security remove you." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the greed in her eyes, the same greed I saw in Derek. They didn't want my home because they needed shelter. They wanted it because it was a trophy. They wanted to conquer me. I took a deep breath, forcing the tears back. I needed to maintain the ruse. I needed them to believe I was broken. "Fine," I whispered, looking down at the floor. "I will be gone by Wednesday." Joyce smiled, a triumphant, predatory smile. "I knew you would see reason. Now move that box. You are blocking the flow of the room." I picked up the box, my knuckles white. Let her measure the windows. Let her pick out the cream linens. She didn't know that by the time Derek moved back in, this apartment wouldn't be a sanctuary. It would be a foreclosure site. And those new curtains? They would look great when the bank auctioned them off. I sat on the edge of the stiff hotel bed at the Four Seasons, the blue light of my iPad illuminating the dark room. I had been kicked out of my own penthouse. But Derek wasn't satisfied with just taking my home. He wanted my reputation, too. On the screen, a popular social media relationship guru was hosting a live stream titled "The Silent Struggle of Men," and the guest of honor was my husband. Derek looked nothing like the arrogant man who had shoved me into a wall outside the spa. He was wearing a wrinkled gray t-shirt. His hair was unkempt, and he had dark circles under his eyes that I suspected were makeup. He looked broken. He looked like a victim. Beside him sat Courtney, holding his hand, looking at him with the adoration of a saint protecting a martyr. "I never wanted to take this public," Derek said, his voice cracking perfectly on cue. "I am a private man, but I cannot sit back and let Solange spin this narrative that I am some kind of gold digger. I built Solange Ventures. I stayed up late nights writing the business plans while she slept. I sacrificed my own career as a pro golfer to be her rock. And how does she repay me? By freezing me out. By cutting off access to the very money I helped earn." The host nodded sympathetically. "So you are saying this is financial abuse?" "It is absolutely financial abuse," Courtney chimed in, squeezing Derek's hand. "Solange has always been controlling. She uses her wealth to silence people. We are just worried about her mental state. She has been acting so erratic lately, attacking me at my workplace, screaming at his mother. We think she is having a breakdown, and she is taking it out on Derek." I watched the comment section scroll by at lightning speed. It was a massacre. People who didn't know me, people who had never seen the contracts or the late nights I pulled, were tearing me apart. "She sounds toxic," one user wrote. Another commented, "This is why high-value men should avoid career women. She thinks she is a man." My chest tightened. They were winning the court of public opinion. They were painting me as the angry, unstable Black woman who emasculated her supportive husband. For a moment, I wanted to throw the iPad against the wall. I wanted to log in and scream the truth. I wanted to post the video of him shoving me. But then, Derek said something that made me freeze. "I just want what is fair," Derek said, looking directly into the camera. "I want control of the legacy trust because I am the only one who knows how to manage those assets properly. I was the one who structured the portfolio. I am the reason it is profitable. Without me, that trust is worthless." I sat back, a slow smile spreading across my face. He had just admitted, on a live broadcast with 50,000 witnesses, that he was the architect of the Legacy Trust. He claimed full responsibility for its structure. He claimed he knew exactly what was inside it. I picked up my phone and called Elena. "Did you see it?" I asked. "I saw it," Elena replied, her voice sounding giddy. "He just waived his right to claim ignorance. If he says he built the trust, he owns the debts inside the trust. Let the internet hate me for a few more days, I told her, because when the dust settles, Derek is going to wish he had stayed offline. He just auditioned for the role of his life, and I am going to make sure he gets the part. Specifically, the part where he pays the bill. I stared at my reflection in the hotel bathroom mirror. I looked too composed. I looked too strong. If I wanted to sell this lie, I needed to sound like the broken woman Derek had painted me to be on his live stream. I pinched the bridge of my nose hard until my eyes watered, and I let out a shaky breath, intentionally hyperventilating just enough to make my voice thin and brittle. I dialed his number. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the clinking of silverware in the background. He was out to dinner, probably celebrating his victory before it even happened. "What do you want, Solange?" Derek answered, his voice loud and performative. I assume he was putting me on speakerphone so his audience could hear my defeat. "I am done, Derek," I whispered, letting a sob catch in my throat. "I cannot do this anymore. The comments online, the reporters calling my phone. You win. I just want it to stop." There was a pause and then a smug chuckle. "I told you, Solange. I told you that you couldn't handle the real world without me. You pushed me too far, and now you are paying the price." "I know," I said, forcing the words out through gritted teeth. "I spoke to Elena. I told her to draft the settlement giving you full control of the Legacy Trust and the managing interest in Solange Ventures LLC. I am not going to fight you in court. I just want peace." "Excellent," Derek said. His voice was dripping with satisfaction. "That is the first smart business decision you have made in years. Have the papers ready by tomorrow morning. Courtney and I will come by to sign them." "Wait, Derek," I pleaded, playing my final card. "There is just one thing, please." The Mercedes G-Wagon. I bought that with my first bonus check before we got married. It means everything to me. Please, just let me keep the car. I will give you everything else, but don't take my car. I held my breath. This was the most important part of the trap. If I gave him everything without asking for a crumb, he might get suspicious. By begging for a car, I validated his ego. I made him feel like a benevolent king granting a mercy to a peasant. Derek laughed, a cruel, barking sound. "You want the car? That is what you are worried about? You are losing an empire and you are crying about a used Mercedes? Fine, keep the damn car. Consider it a parting gift. I will be driving much better things soon anyway." "Thank you," I whispered. "Thank you, Derek." He hung up without saying goodbye. I stared at the phone for a second, then lowered it to the bedspread. I wiped the fake tears from my eyes and stood up straight. My posture returned to its usual confidence. He thought he had stripped me of my dignity. He didn't realize that I had just traded a $60,000 car for a $5 million debt. He was so busy celebrating his victory over my vehicle that he forgot to check the mileage on the company he just stole. I walked over to the minibar and opened a sparkling water. The performance was over. Tomorrow, the trap would snap shut. The conference room at the law firm was cold, sterile, and smelled faintly of lemon polish and shark skin. I sat on one side of the long glass table, flanked only by Elena. On the other side sat Derek, his attorney Mr. Vance, and incredibly, Courtney. She wasn't a party to this lawsuit. She wasn't a lawyer, yet there she was, sitting right next to Derek, holding a red pen like a teacher ready to grade a failing paper. Mr. Vance cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable with Courtney's presence. He slid the settlement agreement across the table. As discussed, Miss Brooks agrees to transfer full executive control of the Legacy Trust to Mr. Brooks. In exchange, she retains her personal vehicle and personal effects. I kept my head down, staring at my hands, playing the part of the defeated wife. I just want this over with, I whispered, keeping my voice small. Courtney reached out and snatched the document before Derek could even pick up a pen. She flipped through the pages aggressively, her eyes scanning the asset list. She didn't understand half the legal jargon, but she was looking for key words. Suddenly, her finger jabbed onto page 4. "Wait a minute," she said, her voice shrill in the quiet room. "What is this? Solange Ventures AI proprietary code. Why isn't this checked off?" Mr. Vance sighed. "Mrs. Miller, that is intellectual property currently in development. It is difficult to value, and Solange's team argued it is personal work product." "Personal work product?" Courtney scoffed. She turned to Derek. "Baby, this is that software she is always bragging about, the one she says is going to revolutionize the market. If she wants to keep it, that means it is worth millions. We want it." I looked up, letting a flash of panic cross my face. "No, please. That code isn't finished. It is just a prototype. It is not generating revenue yet. If you take that, I have nothing left to rebuild with." Derek saw my panic, and his eyes lit up. It was the reaction he was waiting for. He leaned back, crossing his arms, feeling like a master strategist. "Courtney is right," Derek said, smirking. "You are trying to hide the golden goose, Solange. We want the copyright. We want the source code. And we want the exclusive management rights to the development team." Elena, playing her part perfectly, slammed her hand on the table. "This is extortion. You are already taking the trust and the operating company. You cannot strip her of her intellectual property, too. That is her mind. You cannot own her mind." "Watch me," Derek said coldly. "Add it to the list, Vance. The AI software and all associated liabilities and assets. Or we go to trial, and I drag this out for 3 years. Mr. Vance looked at Derek. "Mr. Brooks, I strongly advise we get an independent valuation before acquiring development assets. Sometimes these things carry hidden overhead costs." "I don't need a valuation," Derek snapped, looking at me with pure contempt. "I know my wife. She only fights for things that make money. If she is fighting for this code, it is because she plans to sell it next week. Put it in the contract." I slumped back in my chair, burying my face in my hands to hide the fact that I wasn't crying. I was calculating. They had just demanded the management rights to a software project that was currently bleeding $40,000 a month in server costs and had 0 customers. They thought they were stealing the future. In reality, they were stealing a burning building. "Fine," I whispered, my voice trembling. "Take it. Take the AI. Take the trust. Just let me sign and leave." Courtney grinned, handing the red pen to Derek. "Sign it, baby. We just became tech moguls." Derek signed his name with a flourish, the scratch of the pen on paper sounding like the closing of a prison cell. His cell. He pushed the papers toward me. I picked up the pen, my hand shaking just enough to sell the performance, and signed away my empire. As I put the pen down, Courtney winked at me. It was the most satisfying wink I had ever received, because I knew that in 48 hours, she wouldn't be winking. She would be weeping. Courtney wasn't done. She had tasted blood with the AI software, and now she was scouring the document for any other scraps of power she felt I was hoarding. She stopped at page 12, her finger stabbing the paper so hard the table shook. Derek, look at this. Paragraph 14. It says the transferor retains fiduciary liability for all pre-existing portfolio allocations. She looked up at me with a sneer. You think you are slick, don't you, Solange? You want to hand over the company but keep the fiduciary title? That is where the real power is, isn't it? You want to be the one pulling the strings in the background. I felt a genuine bead of sweat roll down my back, but not from fear. It was from the sheer effort of keeping a straight face. Courtney thought fiduciary liability meant executive power. She thought it was a badge of honor. She didn't know it was the legal term for being personally responsible if the money disappeared or if the government came looking for unpaid taxes. Mr. Vance, their lawyer, actually looked alarmed. Miss Miller, that is standard boilerplate. Fiduciary liability isn't a benefit. It is a risk. It means if the trust was mismanaged in the past, the person holding that title is personally on the hook for the damages. You do not want that. Derek slammed his hand on the table, silencing his own attorney. Stop trying to protect her, Vance! Look at her face! Look at how relieved she looks that you are telling me to say no. He pointed at me. I was doing my best to look guilty, biting my lip and looking away. She wants to keep the liability because she knows that is how she controls the narrative, Derek shouted. She thinks I am too stupid to handle the responsibility. She thinks I will crash the ship, so she wants to keep her hand on the wheel. No, Derek, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Mr. Vance is right. It is a burden. You don't want the liability. If the IRS audits the legacy years, it is a nightmare. Please, let me keep that burden. It is the least I can do. Courtney laughed, a sharp, barking sound. Oh, please. You are such a martyr. You just don't want Derek to have full authority. We want it all, Solange. We want the assets, the management rights, and the fiduciary liability. We want it in writing that Derek Brooks is the sole responsible party for everything this family owns. Mr. Vance rubbed his temples, clearly realizing he was losing control of his client. Mr. Brooks, I strongly advise against assuming historical liability without a forensic audit. You work for me, Vance, Derek snapped. Put it in the contract. I want full fiduciary liability. I want to be the only name on the hook. I want her completely erased from the books. Elena typed furiously on her laptop, adding the clause. She looked up, her face a mask of professional concern. Are you sure, Mr. Brooks? This clause states that you indemnify Solange against any and all future claims regarding the history of the trust. I am sure, Derek said, puffing out his chest. I can handle it. I built this fortune. I can defend it. I let out a shaky breath, signing the addendum they had just demanded. They had just fought tooth and nail to steal my debts. They had just argued with their own lawyer to secure the right to be sued. I slid the papers across the table. It is yours, Derek. You are now the fiduciary. Good luck. The laser printer in the corner of the conference room hummed to life, spitting out the final version of the settlement agreement. To anyone else, it sounded like a standard office machine. To me, it sounded like the sharpening of a guillotine blade. Elena collected the warm pages, tapped them on the table to straighten the stack, and handed the document to Mr. Vance. Her face was a mask of professional defeat, but I could see the tiny, rhythmic pulse in her jaw. She was holding back a smile. This is the revised master transfer agreement, Elena said, her voice devoid of emotion. As requested by Mr. Brooks, we have removed the protective clauses for Solange. We have replaced them with a total assignment of interest. Mr. Vance took the document, adjusting his glasses. He started to read the new language in Article 5. I watched his eyes widen as he reached the third paragraph. He looked up at Derek, his face pale. "Derek, look at this," Vance whispered, pointing to the text. "The language here is absolute. It says, 'The transferee, Derek Brooks, hereby assumes all historical, current, and future financial obligations attached to the entities listed in Exhibit C, regardless of their origin date.'" Derek waved a hand dismissively, not even looking at the paper. Yeah, I know. We went over this. I take the risk, I get the reward. Just give me the pen." Vance hesitated. He was a shark, but even sharks have a survival instinct. "Derek, you need to read Exhibit C. That is where the specific liabilities are listed. If you sign this, you are waiving your right to contest any debt attached to those companies." Courtney leaned over, snatching the contract from the lawyer's hands. "Oh my God, stop stalling!" She flipped to the back, barely glancing at the thick appendix labeled Exhibit C. "It is just standard legal junk, Derek. She is probably just trying to scare you so you back out. If we don't sign this now, she will change her mind and we lose the AI code." That was the catalyst. The fear of losing the imaginary fortune overrode the fear of the real debt. Derek grabbed the document from Courtney. He didn't read Article 5. He didn't look at Exhibit C, which clearly listed the $4 million in tax liens and the operational deficits of the animal sanctuary. He just flipped to the signature line. "You are right, Court," Derek said. He looked at me, his eyes full of arrogant pity. "You had your chance to run this family, Solange. Now it is my turn." He signed his name with a heavy, aggressive hand. The scratch of the pen against the paper was loud in the silent room. He pressed down so hard he almost tore the page. Next to his signature, he checked the box labeled Sole Fiduciary. "There," he said, tossing the pen onto the table. "It is done. I own it all." Elena took the document back, checking the signature to ensure it was valid. She closed the folder with a soft snap. "Thank you, Mr. Brooks. We will file this with the court immediately for the judge's final seal tomorrow morning." Derek stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. In reality, he was a man who had just volunteered to jump on a grenade. He offered his hand to me, a final gesture of condescension. "No hard feelings, Solange. It is just business." I looked at his hand, then at his face. I didn't shake it. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. "You are absolutely right, Derek," I said. "It is just business. And you should always read the fine print." I walked out of the conference room before I started laughing. The contract was signed, the trap was armed. All that was left now was for the judge to pull the trigger. The ink on the settlement agreement was barely dry before the notifications started rolling in. I was sitting in my temporary apartment, a glass of Pinot Noir in hand, watching my life being mocked in real time on Instagram Live. Derek and Courtney hadn't wasted a second. They were at Joyce's house, turning a Tuesday night into a full-blown victory parade. The camera panned around the living room, which was filled with balloons and streamers. Bottles of Dom Perignon, likely charged to the very corporate card I was about to cancel, were popping every few minutes. I watched as Derek stood on his mother's coffee table, holding a glass high in the air. He looked flushed, sweaty, and deliriously happy. He shouted over the music, demanding everyone's attention. To new beginnings, he roared, his voice distorting on the phone speaker. And to Solange, for finally realizing that you cannot beat a man who knows his worth. She folded like a cheap lawn chair, everyone. She gave us everything. The company, the trust, the future. The room erupted in cheers. I saw Joyce hugging him, wiping tears from her eyes. I am so proud of you, son, she yelled. You took back what belongs to this family. You showed her who the real boss is. Then the camera swung to Courtney. She was wearing my diamond tennis bracelet, the one Derek had stolen from the safe before he left. She held her wrist up to the lens, winking. She thought she could keep the AI code to herself, Courtney laughed, leaning into Derek. But we got it. We are the tech moguls now. Solange is probably crying in her car right now, realizing she just signed away $1 billion idea. I didn't cry. I zoomed in on the video. I looked at the timestamp. It was 9 p.m. In exactly 12 hours, the court would open, and the transfer of liability would become official. They were celebrating the acquisition of a sinking ship. They were dancing on the deck of the Titanic, convinced they had just bought the ocean. I listened to them dissect my character. Derek told a story about how I used to nag him about reading contracts, mimicking my voice in a high, shrill tone. Everyone laughed. He called me uptight. He called me boring. He said I lacked vision. It was fascinating to watch. Usually, revenge is a dish best served cold, but this felt different. This was watching a suicide in slow motion. They were so drunk on their own ego that they couldn't smell the gas leak in the room. I tapped the screen, taking a screenshot of Courtney wearing my stolen bracelet. That would be useful later for the theft charges, but for now, I let them have their moment. I let them drink the expensive champagne and toast to their own brilliance, because tomorrow, the hangover wouldn't be from the alcohol. It would be from the $4 million tax bill arriving via certified mail. Enjoy the party, Derek, I whispered to the screen as I closed the app. You have exactly 12 hours of happiness left. I set my alarm for 8 a.m. I wanted to be wide awake when the first domino fell. While Derek was popping bottles of champagne, I was engaged in a much quieter, deadlier form of celebration. I sat in my home office with the lights dimmed, 3 monitors glowing in front of me. On the left screen was the live feed of their party. On the right screen was the encrypted interface of my grandmother's master portfolio. They thought they had won the war because they captured the flag. They didn't realize I had already moved the castle. I opened the transfer portal for Solange Ventures Global IP Holdings. This was the parent company that actually owned the patents, the trademarks, and the revenue streams. Derek had demanded Solange Ventures LLC, the operating entity. It was a distinction that would cost him everything. With a few keystrokes, I initiated a series of pre-approved transfers. I moved the cash reserves from the holding accounts into a new, irrevocable charitable trust dedicated to STEM education for underprivileged girls. I watched the progress bar load. 10%. 50%. Done. $12 million in liquid assets vanished from the books of the company Derek was about to inherit and reappeared in a untouchable sanctuary. It was completely legal. The bylaws allowed the primary director to make charitable donations at their discretion up until the moment of resignation. And since I hadn't resigned yet, I was just being incredibly generous. Next, I tackled the real estate. The deed to the Hamptons summer house, which Derek loved to brag about, was held by the Legacy Trust. But the land it sat on? That was owned by a separate land grant I had established 5 years ago. I executed a lease termination clause. Effectively, I evicted the house from its own land. When Derek took over the trust tomorrow, he would own a beautiful mansion that was legally trespassing on my property. He would have 30 days to move the entire house or face demolition. I felt a cold thrill as I clicked confirm on the final transfer. I wasn't stealing. I was protecting. My grandmother didn't build this fortune so a man who cheated on her granddaughter could buy sports cars. She built it to empower us. I left exactly enough in the operating accounts to cover payroll for 2 weeks and the electricity bill. I left him the shell, the brand name, and the ego. But the heart of the empire? That was coming with me. My phone pinged with a confirmation email from the bank. Asset reallocation complete. I leaned back in my chair, stretching my arms overhead. On the left monitor, Derek was doing a shot of tequila, laughing with his arm around Courtney. He looked so happy. He had no idea that he was currently the proud owner of a hollowed-out pumpkin. I closed the laptop, took a sip of my wine, and whispered into the quiet room. Checkmate, Derek. You just bought the most expensive nothing in history. I kept the audio feed running long after the last guest had stumbled out of my mother-in-law's house. The celebration was over, and the silence of the aftermath was where the truth usually lived. On my screen, I saw Derek sitting by the fire pit in the backyard, holding the signed contract in one hand and a half-empty bottle of beer in the other. He wasn't cheering anymore. He was staring at the paper with a furrowed brow, the alcohol wearing off just enough to let a sliver of instinct creep in. Courtney walked out to join him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders. She looked triumphant, buzzing with the energy of a woman who thought she had just won the lottery. She sat down next to him, resting her head on his shoulder. "What is wrong with you?" she asked, noticing his mood. "We just won, Derek. Why do you look like you were at a funeral?" Derek didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the signature line. "It was too easy, Court. That is what is bothering me. Solange does not just give up. She fights over the thermostat setting. She fights over the color of the throw pillows. Why would she hand over a multi-million-dollar portfolio without screaming? Why did she only care about that stupid car?" I leaned in closer to my speaker, holding my breath. This was the dangerous moment. If Derek pulled the thread of his suspicion, the whole tapestry would unravel. He might actually call a lawyer who wasn't on his payroll. He might check the county clerk records for the land deeds. Courtney laughed, a dismissive, arrogant sound that grated on my ears. "You are overthinking it, baby. You are giving her way too much credit. She is not plotting anything. She is just a woman." "But the AI code," Derek pressed. "She said it was her life's work. She just signed it away like it was a grocery list." Courtney sighed, taking the beer from his hand and taking a sip. "Look, I know you are used to seeing her as this big, bad CEO, but deep down, she is just like every other desperate woman we know. You broke her heart, Derek." She turned to face him, her voice dripping with a toxic mix of racism and misogyny. "You know how Black women are when they fall in love. They are loyal to a fault. They will tolerate anything just to keep a man. She gave you the company because she thinks it is a peace offering. She thinks that if she shows you she can be submissive, you will come back home. She is not playing chess, Derek. She is begging for attention." Derek looked at her, the doubt in his eyes fading as his ego rushed in to fill the void. "You really think that is it? You think she wants me back?" "Of course she does," Courtney sneered. "Why else would she keep the car you guys drove on your honeymoon? She is pathetic. She is sitting in that hotel room right now, waiting for you to call and thank her. She thinks she can buy your love back with her assets. Derek sat back, a slow, smug smile returning to his face. He took the beer back and drained it. You are right. She is probably staring at the phone right now. Well, let her wait. I have a company to run. I turned off the monitor, the sound of Courtney's laughter echoing in my office. They had rationalized their victory by relying on the very stereotypes they used to belittle me. They thought I was weak. They thought I was desperate. They thought I was a stereotype. They were about to learn that I was none of those things. I was a mathematician, and I had just solved the equation for their destruction. The fluorescent lights of the courthouse conference room buzzed like angry hornets. It was 8 a.m, 30 minutes before Judge Sterling was scheduled to take the bench. The room was divided by a long oak table that felt less like a piece of furniture and more like a border between two warring nations. On one side, Derek sat checking his watch, looking fresh, rested, and smelling of expensive soap. Courtney was next to him, scrolling through her phone, likely checking the engagement numbers on the live stream from the night before. On my side, it was just me and Elena. I wore a simple black dress and kept my eyes lowered, playing the part of the grieving widow to a marriage that wasn't even dead yet. Elena placed the final consolidated settlement agreement on the center of the table. It was thick, heavy, and bound in a blue legal folder. To Derek, it looked like the keys to the kingdom. To me, it looked like the instruction manual for a bomb. Here is the finalized stipulation, Elena said, her voice quiet and resigned. By signing this, Solange agrees to waive all future claims to the Solange Ventures LLC and the Legacy Trust. In exchange, Mr. Brooks agrees to assume full control and all associated liabilities immediately upon the judge's approval. Derek didn't even look at her. He just reached out his hand, snapping his fingers impatiently for a pen. Give it here. Let's get this over with. I have a brunch reservation at 11 to celebrate. I reached for the pen first. My hand trembled, a calculated performance of hesitation. I looked at Derek, letting my eyes fill with water. I wanted him to see the pain. I wanted him to believe that I was signing away my soul, not his safety net. Derek, please, I whispered, my voice cracking. You don't know what you are doing. That trust, it is heavy. It requires so much work. Are you sure you don't want me to stay on as an advisor? Just for the transition? Courtney scoffed, slamming her phone down on the table. Oh my God, give it a rest, Solange. He doesn't need your help. He built that company in his head before you even typed a line of code. Stop trying to cling to him. It is pathetic. Just sign the paper and go cry in your Mercedes. Derek looked at me with cold, dead eyes. You heard her, Solange. I don't need an advisor. I need you to disappear. Sign it. I took a deep breath, letting the air shudder out of my lungs. I lowered the pen to the paper. I signed my name slowly, deliberately, pressing down hard so the ink bled slightly into the page. With every loop of my signature, I was severing the anchor that had weighed me down for years. I was transferring the chaos, the debts, and the headaches to the man who claimed he was the genius behind it all. I slid the folder to him. Derek didn't hesitate. He didn't read the first page. He didn't check the addendum. He just slashed his signature across the line with a flourish, like a celebrity signing an autograph. He capped the pen and tossed it onto the table, the plastic clattering loudly in the silence. Done, he declared, leaning back in his chair with a smug grin. Finally, the adults are in charge now. Elena pulled the document back, checking the signatures one last time. She closed the folder. Thank you, Mr. Brooks. We will present this to Judge Sterling in 20 minutes for ratification. Derek stood up, buttoning his suit jacket. He looked at me one last time, shaking his head. You look tired, Solange. You should get some rest. You are going to need your energy to look for a job. I watched him walk out of the room, Courtney trailing behind him like a loyal puppy. He thought he was walking toward a coronation. He didn't know he was walking toward an execution. I stood up, dry-eyed and calm. The performance was over. It was time for the reveal. The hotel room was quiet, the kind of heavy, pressurized silence that usually precedes a natural disaster. I sat at the small desk, the only light coming from a brass lamp I had pulled close to my work. In front of me lay a standard manila envelope. To the naked eye, it was a 10-cent piece of office stationery. To me, it was a tactical nuclear weapon. I picked up the documents one by one, reviewing them with the scrutiny of a bomb technician. First, I held up the IRS notification regarding the $4 million tax lien attached to the Solange Ventures LLC operating shell. Derek thought he was inheriting a tech giant. He was actually inheriting a federal investigation. Next, I picked up the operational audit of the elephant sanctuary, highlighting the mandatory monthly donation of $40,000. If he missed a single payment, he would be sued by the Kenyan government for breach of contract. Finally, I included the foreclosure notice for the land underneath the Hamptons' house. I slid the papers into the envelope, listening to the satisfying slide of paper against paper. I wasn't hiding anything. I was simply organizing the liabilities he had legally demanded to own. He wanted to be the boss. I was just giving him the paperwork that came with the job. I reached into my purse and pulled out a small, silver-framed photo of my grandmother. She was standing in front of her first office, wearing a hard hat and a smile that said she knew something you didn't. Nana always told me that men like Derek existed. She called them peacocks. All feathers, no flight. She had built the complicated debt structure into the legacy trust specifically for this moment. She knew that one day someone might try to take it from me, and she wanted to make sure that if they succeeded, they would choke on the prize. I ran my thumb over the glass, looking at her sharp, intelligent eyes. "You were right, Nana," I whispered into the empty room. They didn't ask a single question. They just grabbed. They were so busy counting the money in their heads that they forgot to check if the currency was counterfeit. I took a deep breath, feeling a profound sense of connection to her. Tomorrow, they are going to receive a lesson about the importance of reading the user manual, I said softly, because they are about to turn the key on a machine that is rigged to explode. I sealed the envelope. The sound of the adhesive sticking felt like the closing of a coffin lid. I placed it in my briefcase, right next to the settlement agreement Derek had signed with such arrogance. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I turned off the lamp and climbed into the stiff hotel bed. For the first time in months, I fell asleep instantly. I needed my rest. Tomorrow was Judgment Day, and I wanted to be wide awake when the gavel came down. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 4B swung open with a theatrical groan, and Derek made his entrance. He didn't just walk in, he glided. He was wearing a brand new charcoal suit that I recognized from the charge alert on my phone 2 hours ago. He had spent $3,000 on a victory outfit before the judge had even banged the gavel. He nodded to the bailiff, winked at the stenographer, and pulled out his chair with the exaggerated swagger of a heavyweight champion entering the ring. He wasn't entering a legal proceeding. In his mind, he was arriving at his coronation. Courtney was already seated in the front row of the public gallery, right behind the defense table. She was wearing a bright red dress that was entirely inappropriate for family court, but perfect for the cameras she hoped would be waiting outside. She caught Derek's eye and gave him a subtle thumbs up, mouthing the words, "We did it." They looked like a couple of high school bullies who had just successfully stolen the answer key to the final exam, completely unaware that the teacher had changed the test questions. "All rise," the bailiff bellowed, snapping them out of their self-congratulatory trance. Judge Sterling emerged from his chambers, his black robe billowing around him. He was a stern man, with silver hair and eyes that had seen every variety of human greed New York City had to offer. He took his seat, adjusted his spectacles, and looked down at the docket. The room fell silent. But it wasn't the heavy silence of the previous hearing. It was the electric silence of anticipation. Mr. Vance stood up, buttoning his jacket. "Your Honor, we are pleased to inform the court that the parties have reached a comprehensive settlement. We have submitted the signed stipulation for your review and ratification." Elena stood up beside me. "That is correct, Your Honor. My client has agreed to all of the petitioner's demands to facilitate a swift resolution." Judge Sterling picked up the blue folder containing the settlement. He opened it slowly, his eyes scanning the first page. I watched his face closely. He read the preamble, he read the asset list, and then he reached the section on liability. His eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. He paused, looked over the rim of his glasses at Derek, and then looked back at the paper. He turned the page. He read the addendum where Derek had demanded sole fiduciary status. He turned another page. The silence stretched on for an agonizing 2 minutes. Derek began to tap his foot impatiently. He leaned over to Mr. Vance and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "What is taking so long?" "It is a standard transfer. Just stamp it so we can go to brunch." Judge Sterling slowly closed the folder and clasped his hands together on top of it. He looked directly at Derek. "Mr. Brooks," he said, his voice deep and resonant, "I have reviewed this stipulation. It is unusual. Before I ratify this, I need to confirm that you understand exactly what you have signed. This document transfers significant, unqualified responsibility to you personally. Are you absolutely certain you wish to proceed without further review?" Derek stood up, smiling that arrogant, dimpled smile. "I am certain, Your Honor. I built this portfolio. I am the only one who knows how to handle it. I am ready to take full control." I looked down at my hands to hide the smirk threatening to break through. He had just told the judge, on the record, that he knew exactly what he was doing. The trap wasn't just set. The prey had just walked in and locked the door from the inside. Judge Sterling did not stamp the paper immediately. Instead, he took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly with a silk cloth, a gesture that screamed judicial patience wearing thin. He looked at Derek not with admiration, but with the specific curiosity a scientist has for a bug that is about to fly into a zapper. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Even the stenographer paused, her hands hovering over the keys, sensing that the standard script of a divorce settlement was about to go off the rails. "Mr. Brooks," the judge said, his voice filling the cavernous room, "I need to be absolutely clear for the record. You are petitioning this court to strip Ms. Brooks of all executive power regarding the Solange Ventures LLC and the Legacy Trust. You are also demanding that she be removed from any fiduciary liability, effectively transferring all historical and future financial obligations to yourself. Is that correct? Derek sighed loudly, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. He looked at Courtney, rolling his eyes as if the judge was a slow waiter who couldn't get the order right. Yes, Your Honor, Derek said, his tone bordering on disrespectful. That is correct. I have said it 3 times now. I want full control. Judge Sterling put his glasses back on. And you are asserting that this transfer is equitable because, according to your affidavit, you are the primary architect of these financial vehicles? You claim that without your expertise, these assets would not exist? Derek straightened his tie, puffing out his chest. Absolutely. Solange is a talented woman, sure, but she lacks the strategic vision I have. I built the portfolio. I managed the risk. It is only fair that I control the outcome. It is my hard work, Your Honor. I am just taking back what I created. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. He was claiming credit for my grandmother's genius. He was claiming he built a trust that was established 10 years before I even met him. But I stayed silent. The more he talked, the deeper the hole became. The judge turned his gaze to me. Miss Brooks, do you contest this characterization? Do you object to your husband assuming full responsibility for the, quote, risk he managed? I stood up slowly, keeping my eyes on the floor. No, Your Honor, I said softly. If my husband insists that he is the genius behind the operation, who am I to argue? I just want to move on with my life. I am willing to let him have the credit and the responsibility. Courtney let out a short, sharp laugh from the gallery, quickly covering her mouth when the bailiff glared at her. She thought I was surrendering. She thought I was broken. Judge Sterling looked between us one last time. He picked up his stamp, hovering it over the document. Very well. Since both parties are in agreement, and Mr. Brooks has vehemently asserted his competence and desire for sole liability, the court is inclined to grant the request. Derek grinned, turning to give Mr. Vance a high five that the lawyer awkwardly ignored. But before the stamp hit the paper, I cleared my throat. One moment, Your Honor, I said, my voice suddenly losing its tremble. Before you finalize the judgment, and since Mr. Brooks has so graciously accepted full liability for the portfolio he claims to know so well, I have one small piece of evidence to submit for the court's file. Just for transparency. Derek froze. The smile didn't leave his face, but it stopped reaching his eyes. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out the manila envelope. It was time to show the architect the blueprints of the building he had just bought. The courtroom air was so still that the hum of the ventilation system sounded like a jet engine. I walked toward the bench, my heels clicking rhythmically on the parquet floor. I held the manila envelope with both hands, presenting it like a sacred offering. Mr. Vance, Derek's lawyer, looked at the packet with sudden suspicion. He started to half rise from his chair, sensing a trap, but Derek grabbed his arm and pulled him back down, whispering something aggressive about letting me embarrass myself. Your Honor, I said, my voice projecting clearly to the back of the room where Courtney was still smirking. Since we are transferring total fiduciary control to Mr. Brooks, and since he has so passionately claimed to be the sole architect of these financial entities, I felt it was my ethical duty to provide the court with the most recent independent audit of the Legacy Trust and Solange Ventures LLC. I placed the envelope on the judge's high desk. I simply want to ensure that the record reflects exactly what Mr. Brooks is taking credit for. Transparency is key in these matters, as I am sure my husband would agree. Judge Sterling looked at me over the rim of his glasses. He looked at the envelope, then at Derek. Derek waved his hand dismissively. "Let her submit whatever she wants, Your Honor," Derek scoffed, leaning back and crossing his legs. "She is probably just trying to itemize the office furniture or some other petty expense. I know the books. I wrote the books. There is nothing in there that I cannot handle." Judge Sterling picked up the envelope. He slid his finger under the flap and tore it open. The sound was sharp and final. He pulled out the stack of documents I had prepared the night before. He adjusted his reading light and looked at the first page, which was the executive summary of liabilities. I watched the judge's face carefully. At first, his expression was neutral. Then, his eyebrows knit together. He leaned closer to the page. He flipped to the second document, the IRS notification. His eyes widened slightly. He looked up at Derek, then back down at the paper, flipping through the pages with increasing speed. The look on his face shifted from boredom to absolute incredulity. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, his voice dropping to a dangerously low register, "have you reviewed these current balance sheets?" Mr. Vance stood up, looking nervous. "No, Your Honor. Mr. Brooks assured us that he was intimately familiar with the assets and waived the discovery phase to expedite the transfer." The judge let out a short, dry chuckle. He looked at Derek with a mixture of pity and disbelief. "Mr. Brooks, you stated under oath that you are the architect of the Solange and Nana Legacy Trust. You stated that you managed the risk." "I did," Derek said, though his voice wavered slightly as he noticed the judge's tone. Judge Sterling held up a document with a bright red stamp on it. "Then surely you are aware that the Legacy Trust is currently the defendant in a class action lawsuit regarding the structural integrity of the Detroit property. And you are aware of the $4 million federal tax lien attached to the LLC you just demanded full ownership of?" The room went dead silent. Courtney stopped scrolling on her phone. Derek's smile vanished instantly. He blinked, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Excuse me?" Derek stammered. "A tax lien? No, that is impossible. The company makes millions." The judge shook his head, looking at the papers again. "The holding company makes millions, Mr. Brooks. But you didn't ask for the holding company. You asked for the LLC. And according to this audit, the LLC is technically insolvent." I stood there, hands clasped in front of me, watching the blood drain from my husband's face. The trap hadn't just sprung. It had crushed him. And I hadn't said a word. I just let the paperwork do the screaming. Judge Sterling did not speak immediately after revealing the insolvency. Instead, he looked back down at the documents Solange had provided. The room was frozen in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the gavel to fall. But the gavel didn't move. The judge simply stared at the breakdown of the Elephant Sanctuary's operating costs and the grandfather clause regarding the Detroit building's asbestos removal requirements. At first, his brow furrowed deeply, creating a roadmap of confusion on his forehead. He squinted at the numbers, perhaps thinking he had misread a decimal point. Then, his eyes widened. They grew rounder and rounder, scanning down the page to the total liability column. He looked like a man who had just opened a puzzle box and found a live cobra inside. But then, the most terrifying thing happened. His shoulders began to shake. It started as a subtle vibration, rattling the silk of his robe. Then, a sound escaped his lips. It wasn't a cough. It wasn't a reprimand. It was a snort. A genuine, stifled snort of amusement. Judge Sterling clamped a hand over his mouth, trying to maintain the decorum of the court, but it was a losing battle. The sheer, unadulterated irony of the situation broke him. He let out a loud, booming laugh that echoed off the mahogany walls. It was the kind of laugh you hear at a comedy club, not a divorce hearing. The entire courtroom stared at him in stunned silence. The stenographer stopped typing, her hands hovering in the air. The bailiff looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight. Courtney looked around wildly, whispering loudly to Derek. Why is he laughing? Is he laughing at her? Did we win? Derek, however, looked furious. His narcissism couldn't process the idea that he was the punchline. He slammed his hand on the table, standing up. "Excuse me, Your Honor," Derek shouted, his face turning a blotchy red. "I fail to see what is so funny. My financial portfolio is a serious matter. If you are laughing at my wife's attempt to hide assets, I demand you hold her in contempt." Judge Sterling waved a hand at Derek, trying to catch his breath. He took off his glasses and wiped a tear of mirth from his eye. "Oh, Mr. Brooks, I am not laughing at your wife. I am not even laughing at you. I am laughing at the universe. In 30 years on the bench, I have seen tragedy. I have seen malice. And I have seen incompetence. But never, in all my years, have I seen a man fight so aggressively for the privilege of drowning." The judge picked up the document labeled Exhibit D, the Kenya Conservation Pledge. He looked at Derek with a mixture of pity and delight. "Mr. Brooks, do you know what a recurring, non-revocable charitable obligation is?" he asked, his voice still trembling with suppressed laughter. Derek frowned. "I assume it is a tax write-off?" "Which I will handle expertly." The judge chuckled again, shaking his head. "Oh, it is a write-off, all right. It writes off $40,000 of your liquid cash every single month to feed elephants. And according to this contract, which you claim to have architected, if you miss a payment, the penalty is triple the outstanding amount." Mr. Vance, realizing the ship was sinking, lunged across the table. "Judge, may I see that document?" Judge Sterling slid the entire envelope toward the defense table. "Be my guest, counselor. Read it and weep. Literally." Solange stood perfectly still, her face a mask of calm. Inside, she was cheering, but outwardly, she just watched as Mr. Vance picked up the papers. She watched the color drain from his face as he realized that his client hadn't just won a company, he had won a financial death sentence. Judge Sterling wiped the final tear of laughter from his face, but the amusement in his eyes was quickly replaced by the sharp, clinical focus of an executioner reading a death warrant. He adjusted his glasses, picking up the document Derek had fought so hard to sign. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the sound of Courtney nervously tapping her acrylic nails against her phone screen. Derek remained standing, his face a mask of confusion that was slowly cracking into panic. "Let the record show," Judge Sterling began, his voice booming off the mahogany walls, "that the court is officially reading the liabilities attached to the assets Mr. Brooks has demanded." The judge held up the first page. "The entity known as the Legacy Trust is not, as Mr. Brooks assumed, a repository of family wealth. It is, in fact, a 501c3 wildlife protection fund registered to handle high-risk conservation efforts." He paused, looking directly at Derek. And this fund is currently carrying a standing debt of $2 million in unpaid land lease fees to the Kenyan government. Furthermore, the bylaws, which Mr. Brooks claims to have written himself, stipulate that the sole fiduciary must personally subsidize the operational deficit. That deficit is currently running at $500,000 per year. Derek gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. "Wait," he stammered, his voice losing its smooth, arrogant timbre. "That is a mistake. It is a trust. It has assets. It owns the land." "It owns nothing," the judge corrected him calmly. "It leases the land, and the lease is in arrears. You now personally owe the Kenyan government $2 million, Mr. Brooks. Congratulations on your international investment." Before Derek could process the first blow, Judge Sterling picked up the second sheet of paper. "And regarding the corporate entity," the judge continued, his tone merciless. "While Solange Ventures Global IP Holdings owns the revenue, the operating shell you demanded, which is listed here as the Brooks Investment Company for tax purposes, is legally structured as a debt-holding vehicle. It was created to absorb the losses from failed leveraged loans dating back to the 2008 financial crisis." The judge leaned forward, delivering the final strike. "This entity is currently carrying a solidified federal tax lien of $3 million. By assuming full fiduciary liability, you have just agreed to pay the Internal Revenue Service $3 million plus interest." Mr. Vance dropped his head into his hands. Courtney let out a small, strangled gasp. Derek looked as if he had been punched in the gut. He looked at me, his eyes wide with horror. "You did this," he whispered, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You set me up." I didn't say a word. I simply looked at the judge. "Mr. Brooks," the judge said, his voice cold and final. "You stood in my court 5 minutes ago and swore under oath that you were the architect of these funds. You swore you understood the risk. You swore you wanted sole liability. The court does not look kindly on men who claim credit for the rain and then complain when they get wet." The judge raised his gavel. The trap had snapped shut. The weight of $5 million in debt didn't just land on Derek's shoulders. It crushed him into the floorboards. And the best part was, he had signed his name to every single cent of it. Derek's face went from a flush of anger to a ghostly, sickly white in the span of a single heartbeat. The reality of the numbers the judge had just read out loud slammed into him like a freight train. $5 million. Not in assets, but in immediate, callable debt. He scrambled backward, his chair legs screeching against the floor, and knocked over a pitcher of water. The glass shattered, soaking the cuffs of his $3,000 suit, but he didn't even notice. "Objection!" Derek screamed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeal of panic. "I object! I didn't know about the liens. She hid them. She trapped me. I withdraw my signature. I want a do-over." Mr. Vance stood up, looking pale and defeated. "Your Honor, my client moves to vacate the stipulation on the grounds of—" "On the grounds of what, Counselor?" Judge Sterling interrupted, his voice cutting through the chaos like a razor. "On the grounds that your client lied under oath? On the grounds that he was too arrogant to read the discovery documents?" The judge leaned over the bench, staring down at Derek, who was now gripping the table as if it were a life raft in a hurricane. "Mr. Brooks," the judge said sternly, 10 minutes ago, you stood in this courtroom and mocked the court's concern. You insisted, quite loudly, that you were the mastermind behind these entities. You insisted that you knew every nut and bolt of the operation. You cannot claim to be the genius architect when you think there is profit, and then claim to be the ignorant victim when you find out there is debt. But I didn't know, Derek pleaded, looking wildly at Courtney for support. She was shrinking back in her seat, clutching her purse, looking at him with dawn of realization that her meal ticket had just bounced. You signed the document, Mr. Brooks, the judge said, pointing the gavel at him. You signed the waiver of discovery. You signed the assumption of full fiduciary liability. You specifically requested that your wife be indemnified against all future claims. You built this cage, walked inside, and locked the door. Do not ask this court to give you the key just because you don't like the view. The judge straightened up, adjusting his robe. He picked up the settlement agreement, the one Derek had signed with such a flourish only 20 minutes ago. He raised the heavy wooden gavel. The court finds the settlement agreement to be valid, voluntary, and binding, Judge Sterling declared. The transfer of assets and liabilities is effective immediately. Ms. Brooks is hereby released from all financial obligations regarding the Legacy Trust and the Brooks Investment Company. The gavel came down with a thunderous crack that echoed through the room. It sounded like the snapping of a spine. Congratulations, Mr. Brooks, the judge said, his voice dripping with dry irony. You finally got exactly what you wanted. You are the sole owner of the family empire. I suggest you call the IRS immediately. They are very eager to meet the new management. Derek collapsed into his chair, burying his head in his hands. Courtney stood up and practically ran out of the courtroom, leaving him alone in the wreckage. I looked at my ex-husband one last time. He wasn't the powerful patriarch he pretended to be. He was just a man drowning in a sea of red ink. I picked up my purse, turned my back on the chaos, and walked out the door. The air outside had never smelled so sweet. The sharp crack of skin against skin echoed through the marble atrium of the courthouse, instantly silencing the murmurs of the exiting crowd. I paused at the top of the staircase, hidden in the shadow of a limestone pillar, and watched the scene unfold below with a cold, detached satisfaction. Courtney's hand had just connected with Derek's cheek, leaving a rapidly reddening imprint on his pale skin. It was not a theatrical gesture. It was a blow born of pure, unadulterated panic. "You idiot!" she screeched, her face contorted into a mask of ugly rage that ruined her carefully applied makeup. "You told me this was a sure thing! You said we would walk away with millions, and now look at us. You dragged me into this pit of debt for nothing." Derek stumbled back, clutching his face, his eyes wide with shock that quickly morphed into fury. He no longer looked like the arrogant golden boy who had sneered at me across the dinner table for years. He looked like a cornered animal. "Me? You are the one who pushed for the lawsuit, Courtney. You are the one who said she was weak, that she would fold the moment we applied pressure. I wanted to settle months ago, but no, you had to have it all." He jabbed a finger at her chest, his voice rising to a shout that drew the attention of security guards near the metal detectors. "I put up the house for the legal fees because you promised that we would get the inheritance. Now we have nothing. Do you hear me? Less than nothing." The veneer of their perfect power couple dynamic shattered right there on the polished floor. Courtney looked around wildly, realizing people were filming, realizing her social standing was incinerating in real time. "I did not lose the money, Derek. Your incompetence did. You and your cheap lawyers. You fix this right now, or I swear I will take whatever is left and leave you to rot." It was pathetic. It was vicious, and it was exactly what they deserved. They were tearing each other apart over money that never belonged to them in the first place, exposing the rot at the core of their relationship for everyone to see. But the universe was not finished with them yet. Before Derek could shove her away, two men in dark, ill-fitting suits pushed through the revolving doors. They moved with the predatory purpose of process servers, beelining for the couple who were still screaming accusations at one another. One of the men cleared his throat loudly, interrupting Courtney mid-tirade. "Derek and Courtney Miller," he asked, though he clearly knew the answer. Derek froze, the color draining from his face until he looked like a ghost. "Yes," he whispered. "You have been served," the man said, thrusting a thick stack of papers into Derek's chest. "Bank foreclosure notice on the primary residence, repossession orders for the vehicles, and a summons for unpaid legal fees totaling $200,000. The papers scattered on the floor as Derek's hands went limp. Courtney let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob, staring at the documents like they were radioactive. "No," she whimpered, falling to her knees to gather them, her dignity completely abandoned. "This cannot be happening today. We need more time." The server looked down at her without an ounce of sympathy. "You are out of time, ma'am. The assets are frozen, effective immediately." I turned away then, walking toward the exit on the other side of the building. I did not need to see any more. The sight of them scrambling on the floor, fighting over foreclosure notices while the world watched, was the closure I bad not known I needed. Their greed had finally eaten them alive. Derek sped toward the driveway, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. But he was too late. The sanctuary he had built to showcase his stolen success was now a crime scene of financial execution. Two massive tow trucks blocked the entrance, their engines idling with a low, rumbling growl that sounded like impending doom. Men in orange jumpsuits moved with efficient, practiced indifference, hooking heavy chains to the bumper of his silver Porsche 911. "Hey! Get your hands off my car!" Derek screamed, scrambling out of the taxi, having realized moments ago that his rideshare account had been suspended mid-trip. He lunged toward the lead driver, a burly man who looked like he had seen 1,000 desperate men just like Derek. "That is my property! Do you have any idea who I am?" The driver did not even blink. He simply held up a clipboard with a laminate sheet on top. "Bank repossession order, Mr. Miller. Your assets have been flagged for immediate liquidation following the court judgment. Step back, or I will have to call the police." "Liquidation? That takes months." Derek spat, his face flushing a deep, unhealthy red. He fumbled for his phone, his fingers shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. "I will transfer the funds right now. I will pay the arrears. Just unhook the car." He tapped the banking app icon, desperate to prove them wrong, desperate to show he still had power. The screen loaded for a torture-filled second before flashing a stark, gray notification. "Account frozen. Contact your branch immediately. Code insolvency." He stared at the screen, the breath leaving his lungs in a hollow wheeze. He tried his credit card app. Declined. He tried his investment portfolio. Locked. The digital numbers that had defined his self-worth for his entire adult life had evaporated, replaced by digital walls he could not breach. He was not just broke. He was erased. A screech of metal on metal tore his attention back to the driveway. He watched, helpless, as the Porsche was hoisted into the air, its polished rims spinning lazily in the fading sunlight. Behind it, Courtney's Mercedes was already secured on the flatbed of the second truck. They were stripping him of his armor, piece by piece. "You cannot do this," he whispered, the fight draining out of him. But they could, and they did. Within minutes, the trucks roared to life and pulled away, leaving nothing but oil stains on the paver stones. Derek turned and ran toward the front door of the mansion. If he could just get inside, lock the doors, and pour a drink, maybe he could think. Maybe he could find a loophole. He jammed his thumb against the biometric scanner. A harsh red light blinked 3 times. Access denied. He punched in the passcode. Invalid entry. The smart home system, which he had once bragged was state-of-the-art, had been updated by the bank's remote administrators. He was locked out. He pounded his fists against the solid oak door until his knuckles bruised, screaming at the empty house that no longer recognized him as its master. Exhausted, he slid down the doorframe, collapsing onto the cold welcome mat. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn he could no longer pay to maintain. He patted his pockets and realized with a jolt of cold terror that his wallet was inside on the kitchen counter. He had no cash, no cards, no car, no home. I watched from the park across the street, shielded by the oversized sunglasses I had bought with my own hard-earned money. Seeing him there, curled up on the porch like a discarded wrapper, I expected to feel pity. But all I felt was the cool, refreshing breeze of balance being restored. The king had not just lost his crown, he had lost the very ground he stood on. The nightmare for the Miller family did not stop at the gates of the seized mansion. Across town, inside the pristine, lavender-scented sanctuary of La Belle Spa, Courtney was clinging to her last shred of status. She was in the middle of berating a receptionist for a smudge on the glass counter, projecting all her terror and rage onto the terrified girl. This spa was her kingdom, the one place where she could still pretend to be the untouchable queen bee, distinct from the financial ruin consuming her husband. But that illusion shattered the moment the front doors were pushed open with authoritative force. It was not a wealthy client coming in for a facial. 4 officers from the Economic Crimes Unit, accompanied by 2 grim-faced forensic accountants, stepped into the lobby. The sudden intrusion sucked the air out of the room. Clients in plush robes sat up in their chairs, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Courtney Miller, the lead detective, announced. It was not a question. He walked straight to the reception desk, placing a warrant on the polished marble surface. Courtney froze, her face draining of color beneath her layers of expensive foundation. "Excuse me? You cannot just barge in here. This is a private establishment. I will call my lawyer and have your badges for this." Her voice was shrill, trembling with a mix of arrogance and rising panic. "You have the right to remain silent," the detective replied, ignoring her threat as he pulled a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of wire fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and tax evasion." Courtney stumbled back, knocking over a display of overpriced skin creams. "What? No! You are making a mistake! Derek handles the finances. Talk to my husband. I just run the spa." The detective stepped around the counter, his expression unyielding. "We have the documents, Mrs. Miller. You are the sole signatory for DM Ventures, the shell company that received $200,000 in embezzled funds last quarter. Your signature is on every transfer authorization. You are not just a bystander. You are the primary beneficiary of the laundered assets." The realization hit her like a physical blow. Derek. He had told her those papers were just tax formalities. He had told her it was a way to protect their savings. He had used her name to shield himself, setting her up as the fall guy for his dirtiest deals. "He lied to me!" He told me it was legal! Courtney screamed as the cold metal cuffs locked around her wrists. I did not know! You have to believe me! But the law did not care about her ignorance. 2 female officers escorted her out, parading her past the very employees and clients she had looked down upon for years. Phones were already out, recording the downfall of the woman who had once sneered at anyone driving a car older than 2 years. Outside, I watched from the safety of a parked car across the street. I saw Courtney shoved into the back of a police cruiser, her head bowed in shame, her empire dissolving in real time. Behind her, agents were already taping notices to the windows of the spa. Cease and desist. Property seized by federal authorities. The lights inside La Belle Spa were turned off one by one, leaving the building dark and hollow. Courtney had wanted the lifestyle without the work, the glory without the integrity. Now, she had exactly what she had earned. Nothing. The private elevator opened directly into the living room with a soft, expensive chime that sounded like the closing note of a symphony. I stepped out onto the heated marble floors of the penthouse, the silence of the room wrapping around me like a velvet cloak. Below, through the floor-to-ceiling glass walls, the city was a sprawling grid of golden lights, moving and breathing in the chaotic rhythm I had finally risen above. I walked to the kitchen island and poured a glass of vintage Cabernet. The deep red liquid swirled against the crystal, catching the reflection of the document sitting alone on the countertop. It was a single sheet of paper, but it carried the weight of a war that had spanned years. The bank's liquidation sale had been swift and brutal. Derek's assets were stripped and sold off to the highest bidder to cover his insurmountable debts. And among those assets was the intellectual property he had stolen from me. The very patents he had claimed were his life's work. The bank did not care about the history or the betrayal. They only cared about recovering cents on the dollar. So, I bought it. I bought back my own genius, my own hard work, and my own legacy for a price so low it was almost insulting. Derek had destroyed his life trying to keep this technology from me, and in the end, his failure handed it to me on a silver platter. I ran my fingers over the signature line. It was done. I owned it all. I walked out onto the terrace, the night wind whipping through my hair, carrying the scent of rain and ozone. Somewhere down there, in the shadows of the city, Derek was likely sleeping on a friend's couch or shivering in a shelter, wondering where it all went wrong. Somewhere, Courtney was sitting in a holding cell, stripped of her fake lashes and her delusions of grandeur. A part of me, the old part that had been trained to be a good, obedient woman, whispered that I should feel pity, that I should feel a twinge of sadness for family members who had fallen so far. But I crushed that voice instantly. Pity is a luxury reserved for those who make mistakes, not for those who act with malice. They had not made a mistake. They had made a choice. They chose to devalue me, to steal from me, and to try to break my spirit. I took a slow sip of the wine, letting the complex notes of oak and dark fruit settle on my tongue. There would be no forgiveness. Forgiveness implies that the debt has been wiped clean, that the sinner is absolved. I did not absolve them. I balanced the scales. This was not cruelty. It was physics. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. They pushed, and the universe pushed back through me. I looked out at the horizon, where the first hint of dawn was beginning to bleed purple into the black sky. The war was over. The parasites had been removed. My life was finally, completely, and irrevocably my own. I raised my glass to the empty air, a silent toast to the woman I had to become to survive. Solange was no longer the victim. She was the architect of her own destiny. And the view from the top was absolutely magnificent. Solange's journey serves as a brutal, yet beautiful reminder that the ultimate form of revenge is not cruelty, but massive, undeniable success. For too long, she allowed parasites like Derek and Courtney to define her worth, mistaking their manipulation for family bonds. But the moment she stopped seeking their validation was the moment she became invincible. This story teaches us that true power isn't about how loud you scream, but about how effectively you strike when the time is right. Solange didn't waste energy arguing. She let their own greed become the noose that tightened around their necks. We learn that you cannot build a kingdom on a foundation of lies. Derek and Courtney thought they were untouchable, but they forgot that when you dig a grave for someone else, you often fall in yourself. Most importantly, we see that walking away isn't an act of weakness, it is an act of self-preservation. Peace is expensive, but it is worth every penny. You don't owe anyone a seat at your table, especially those who only bring hunger and disrespect. What about you? Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save your own future? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. If you believe in karma, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.